Emotional day for Prince Harry today. He fought back tears in court as he spoke about his wife, Meghan Markle.
A single image has thrown Prince Harry's future into chaos. As reports swirl of a sealed mansion and nights spent in a car, shock ripples through aides, family, and stunned onlookers. Whispers point to collapsing finances, a sudden legal trigger, or a hard palace boundary quietly enforced. Faces tighten, phones fall silent, disbelief curdles into fear. Is this exile by choice, consequence, or something far colder? Stay with us, because what comes next rewrites everything. The silence ahead is louder than any denial. When the camera caught the fall, the moment everything changed did not come with an announcement, a statement, or a carefully managed press release. It came as an image. On January 26th, a single photograph leaked online and spread faster than any royal scandal in recent memory. There was no ambiguity in what it showed. Prince Harry, once surrounded by motorcades and security teams, was slumped in the back seat of a black Range Rover. His beard was untrimmed, his face drawn and pale with exhaustion. A thermal blanket was pulled halfway up his body, as though warmth had become a luxury. His boots were still on, his legs awkwardly curled, suggesting he had not intended to sleep there, only that he had nowhere else to go. This was not a bad angle or a misleading frame. It was not a rumor whispered by tabloids or a distorted palace leak. It was evidence. The photograph carried its own weight, and within hours it detonated across social media, newsrooms, and royal circles alike. For years, stories of financial strain and quiet desperation had hovered around the Duke of Sussex, dismissed by supporters as exaggeration or hostile press. But this image could not be reframed. It showed a man who was not resting between meetings, not taking refuge for privacy, but enduring something far more brutal: displacement. What made the photograph so devastating was not just its content, but its timing. By late January, Harry no longer had access to the Montecito, estate that once symbolized his American reinvention. The protections that had followed him since birth, financial buffers, royal intervention, quiet safety nets, were gone. The car was not a temporary shelter, it was a consequence. And for the first time, exile was no longer theoretical. It was visible, tangible, and humiliatingly public. There was no palace effort to suppress the image, no swift denial, no counter-narrative offered through trusted correspondence. Silence, in this case, spoke louder than outrage. Insiders understood what the photograph represented: the end of royal insulation. Whatever private negotiations had once taken place behind closed doors were over. Harry was no longer being shielded from the results of his own decisions. The institution had stepped back, and the vacuum left behind was unforgiving. The image also shattered the last illusion that this was a controlled withdrawal from royal life. Exile, once framed as a choice made in pursuit of freedom, now looks starkly different. This was not independence. It was isolation, not reinvention, but unraveling. The blanket, the cramped space, the stillness of the scene, all pointed to a reality stripped of dignity. A prince without a palace, a royal without refuge. And yet, the most unsettling part of the photograph was not what it showed, but what it implied. And if this was where Harry slept, then where could he possibly go next? And what secrets lurk in the shadows ahead? Stay tuned. The house that locked him out. If the photograph revealed the fall, the paperwork confirmed it. 2 days before the image of Prince Harry sleeping in his car stunned the public, a quieter but irreversible event had already unfolded. On January 24th, the gates of the Riven Rock estate in Montecito were officially sealed. What had been framed as a private sanctuary, hedges, guards, and Californian promise was no longer his. The loss was not symbolic. It was legal, documented, and final. Unraveling began months earlier. Purchased in 2020 for $14,650,000, Riven Rock was meant to anchor Harry's new American life, but only about $5 million was paid up front. The remaining $9,500,000 sat on a mortgage tied to strict insurance requirements. In wildfire-prone California, coverage was mandatory. As risk levels rose, that insurance quietly lapsed. No replacement policy was secured, no extension finalized. That lapse triggered a technical default. The house could still stand, the gardens still bloom, but on paper, the contract had been breached. Bank of America exercised its right to call in the loan, citing failure to provide proof of renewed coverage. Once that decision was made, the process became unstoppable. Final notices were issued in mid-January. By January 24th, enforcement followed. Appraisers were granted access and spent 6 hours cataloguing the home's contents. Every room was logged, every item tagged. This was not a raid, but a dismantling. Imported Italian furniture, custom wardrobes of designer clothing, advanced security systems, even monogrammed children's dinnerware were listed for off-market liquidation. A baby grand piano, once intended for creative projects linked to a stalled Netflix deal, was removed. The house ceased to be a home. It became an inventory. The estimated value of the remaining items totaled roughly $1,300,000, a figure that barely registered against the larger financial strain surrounding the Sussex household. What made the foreclosure more striking was how avoidable it seemed. Advisors had warned about insurance exposure, deadlines had been flagged, extensions were possible, yet warnings went unanswered and paperwork unfinished until the bank intervened. There was no confrontation at the gates, no public farewell, just a legal seal and a quiet exit. From that moment, Harry no longer had a registered residence in Montecito or anywhere suggesting long-term stability. The mansion that once symbolized reinvention now stood as proof of miscalculation, and in that light, the parking lot photograph took on sharper meaning. The car was not a temporary shelter, it was all that remained. So, what really pushed Harry from comfort to a car-bound exile? Was it miscalculation, betrayal, or something far darker? Keep watching. When the numbers stopped adding up, with Rivenrock's gates sealed and the illusion of stability gone, the truth of the exile crystallized. This was not a sudden misstep, but a slow, compounding collapse, fueled by money that promised rescue and delivered ruin. By late January 2026, the total exposure had reached an estimated $36 million, built from overlapping obligations, stalled income, and commitments that never aligned with reality. At the center sat the so-called Lifeline deal. In 2020, Netflix had announced a headline partnership meant to ensure long-term stability. Only $25 million ever arrived, and it was a recoupable advance tied to deliverables. After a documentary and a single podcast pilot, momentum stalled. An animated series never launched. By early 2026, Netflix invoked its clawback, $20 million to be returned by March 31st, 2026. The clock was ticking, with no replacement revenue in sight. Then came quieter debts, invisible until lawyers intervened. Tyler Perry, once an ally, had extended $3.6 million for security, housing, and travel over 5 years. Costs quietly ballooned. Payments were missed. In December 2025, Perry's legal team issued formal notice. By January 10th, final demands arrived. The message was clear: repay or face litigation. Layered over this were relentless ongoing expenses. Private security, temporary housing, flights, drivers, all piled up without a permanent base. The lifestyle assumed steady income that never materialized. What had been presented as independence increasingly resembled overextension. The contrast was stark. The expectation had been a seamless transition into Hollywood credibility, where prestige would attract funding and cushion risk. Instead, projects stalled, partnerships cooled, and banks closed doors. Credit lines were denied. The belief that another deal or favor would appear proved dangerously optimistic. By the time the mansion was lost, there was nowhere left to turn. No institution offered rescue. No private bailout emerged. The royal family's position was clear: no safety net for failed ventures. Friends who once bridged gaps now moved through attorneys. The math was unavoidable. Timing made the situation cruel. Major repayments were due not years away, but weeks ahead. Debts overlapped, each missed obligation magnifying the next. On paper, the numbers hardened. On the ground, the reality became visible. Foreclosure was not the cause, it was the consequence. The car was not a symbol, it was the result. By January's end, the question was no longer if the collapse could be hidden, but how long confidence and expectation had masked it. The figures told their own story. No margin for error, no relief in sight, and no space left for denial. But how did a man once shielded by royalty find himself cornered, debts looming, and the palace silently watching every desperate move? Stay with us. When blood met boundaries. By the time Harry's financial troubles were fully exposed, London's silence could no longer hold. On January 27, 2026, Prince William addressed the situation directly on a live BBC One broadcast. Calm and deliberate, his tone carried no anger or hesitation, only clarity, which, for many, made the revelation all the more striking. For the first time, William confirmed what had been mere rumour. Harry had requested a $50 million financial rescue, routed through advisors to cover debts, legal exposure, and a potential California residence. The request had been reviewed and firmly rejected. William framed the decision not as personal punishment, but as responsibility. He emphasised stewardship and duty tied to public trust. The Duchy of Cornwall was not a personal slush fund, but a public-facing institution with legal and moral obligations. Emotion, he insisted, could not override governance. Behind this position stood a unified front. King Charles, deeply affected by images of his younger son, aligned with William. Catherine, Princess Anne, and Prince Edward supported the refusal, concerned by frantic financial outreach and deepening instability. There would be no hidden loans, no narrative reshaping into victimhood. Acknowledging the human cost, William referenced his brother's hardships, but drew a line at children, suggesting that defiance could no longer be romanticized when consequences extended beyond the self. The monarchy could not prevent misfortune, but could prevent misrepresentation. This marked a turning point. The institution would no longer absorb fallout from choices it did not make. Harry was not exiled by decree. He was released from protections that once shielded him from failure. The distinction was critical. To the Crown, this was accountability, not abandonment. Reaction was immediate. Some praised the firmness as overdue. Others recoiled at what seemed cold detachment. Inside palace walls, the decision was unanimous. No single voice stood apart. The family closed ranks, not in defense of an individual, but in defense of the institution itself. With public confirmation, the balance of power shifted. The narrative was no longer speculation or sympathy, it was anchored in policy, precedent, and a clear refusal to rewrite failure as persecution. Headlines recalibrated, and one truth settled quietly but firmly. Whatever came next for Harry, it would unfold without royal intervention and without the safety net that had defined his life until now. The monarchy had drawn a line, and it would hold. And now, with protection gone and silence looming, will Harry's next move redefine his life or leave his children trapped in uncertainty? Stay glued when the adults failed. The spotlight fell on the children. After the firm line drawn by the Crown, concern inside the palace began shifting in an unexpected direction. What had started as a financial and institutional reckoning quietly morphed into something far more troubling. By late January, attention moved from bank statements and interviews to two young lives caught in the middle. Archie and Lilibet, once carefully shielded from public scrutiny, had become the most unsettling element of the unfolding story. Reports reaching London painted a difficult picture. Over 9 days, the children were said to have slept in 5 different locations: Airbnbs, boutique hotels, and converted guest houses, none of which were planned visits or holidays. Each move meant new surroundings, new caretakers, and another disruption to any sense of normality. There was no fixed base, no predictable routine. More alarming was what appeared to be missing. Former staff and local sources reported no consistent schooling, no private tutors, and no verified enrollment in either Los Angeles or Santa Barbara County school systems. Caregiving rotated between temporary help and availability rather than structure. One internal report described the situation bluntly. The children had devices, but not classrooms, comfort, but not continuity. As instability deepened, Meghan Markle's mother, Doria Ragland, quietly intervened. She delivered food, clothing, and basic educational supplies, attempting to provide order amid constant movement. Her involvement was practical, subdued, and telling, a grandmother filling gaps that systems and plans should cover. Inside palace walls, the tone shifted decisively. Until then, discussion about Harry had centered on reputation and precedent. Embarrassment was survivable. But children changed the equation. Senior aides flagged concerns that went beyond optics. This was no longer about judgment or public fallout. It was about welfare. Briefings outlined the frequency of relocations, lack of education, and unstable caregiving. What had once been dismissed as turbulence now looked dangerously close to neglect. One official put it plainly: this stops being about adults when children start drifting. Internal mechanisms long left dormant were quietly activated. The royal custodial safeguards, a rarely referenced framework, entered discussion. Its purpose was to assess risk when minor royal descendants lived in unstable conditions. Though its authority did not automatically extend beyond the UK, its invocation signalled the seriousness of the situation. There were no public announcements. Everything unfolded behind closed doors, with discretion over drama, precision over emotion. Yet the gravity was unmistakable. What had begun as concern over a prince's choices escalated into questions about responsibility to children, with no say in those decisions. By January's end, the narrative had shifted again. Financial collapse had exposed vulnerability. Institutional refusal had enforced consequences. But it was the image of two children moving from door to door, without anchors or routine, that introduced the deepest tension. Once that line was crossed, the matter left the realm of family disputes and royal policy. Silence itself now carried risk. Now, could the fragility of a royal legacy hide a darker truth about Harry, Meghan, and the children's uncertain future? One life in the spotlight, another in the shadows. As concern for the children grew behind palace doors, a different story played out in public. By late January, the image of a united Sussex front quietly fractured, not through words, but absence. The separation began subtly, then became undeniable. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry no longer moved as a pair. The distance between their realities grew impossible to ignore. Meghan remained visible. At the Sundance Film Festival, she arrived alone, posed alone, and exited via a separate wing. No joint appearances, no coordination. In the following days, she was photographed at Beverly Hills cafes, wellness events, and skincare launches. Composed, curated, projecting calm control even as their family world shifted. Harry's reality could not have contrasted more sharply. While Meghan's story unfolded under cameras, Harry moved through temporary spaces. Gym parking lots became shelters, coastal truck stops replaced guarded driveways. He relied on prepaid phones, not for privacy, but because options were closing as accounts froze. Movement was constant, chosen for access over comfort, marking a provisional, reactive existence. The contrast peaked at Sundance. What should have been a shared return to public life became a silent confirmation of division. Separate arrivals, separate departures, no visible interaction. Press and onlookers noted the absence. For many, speculation solidified into conclusion. The unity once defining them no longer existed. Public reaction shifted. Sympathy faded, replaced by questions. How could one half appear untouched while the other drifted between temporary stops? Why did the narratives feel disconnected? Social media commentary moved from support to scrutiny, then skepticism. Observers were unsettled not simply by separation, but by its implications. Reports suggested finances, communication, and public strategy were now handled independently. Meghan's visibility hinted at brand preservation. Harry's invisibility suggested retreat. Together, they no longer told a single story. As images accumulated, the narrative of shared sacrifice, the cornerstone of the Sussex identity, felt hollow. One life played out under warm lights and controlled angles, the other slipped through dim lots and anonymous stops, defined by exhaustion rather than intent. By the end of January, the fracture was undeniable. Concern for the children intensified, and the divergence between parents' realities raised urgent questions. Responsibility, priority, direction. A joint struggle had become two separate responses to the same crisis, impossible to ignore. And did Harry's hidden struggle signal a breaking point for the family? Or is there a secret plan unfolding we can't yet see? The quiet phase before the storm. By the time Harry and Meghan's separation became undeniable, Exile had shifted from symbolism to restriction. Doors that once opened quietly were closing. In late January, reports emerged of Harry being denied access to properties he had entered freely before. At a gated coastal California compound, a private security guard silently turned him away. No confrontation occurred. The gate remained shut, a quiet marker of a new reality. Exile was no longer abstract, it was operational. Without a permanent home, Harry moved constantly, relying on temporary shelter, prepaid phones, and minimal trust. Former protection officers described a life stripped to essentials: sleep where possible, eat when available, remain unseen. Each stop was dictated by necessity rather than planning. Speculation grew that Harry was quietly preparing a response. Industry whispers suggested dormant media pitches, memoir adaptations, dramatized accounts, fictionalized royal narratives were circulating beyond traditional studios. Nothing was confirmed publicly, but concern inside palace corridors prompted contingency planning. In London, Kensington Palace acted swiftly, yet discreetly. Legal teams revisited non-disclosure agreements and intellectual property tied to Harry's 2020 departure. Press offices mapped scenarios not to retaliate, but to hold ground. The concern wasn't direct exposure, but implication. A carefully framed suggestion could destabilize weeks of restraint. The stakes were unmistakable. This was no longer about one man's unraveling, but a struggle for narrative control. On one side stood an institution built on silence and measured distance. On the other, a man with intimate knowledge, personal grievance, and little left to lose. Danger lay not in what might be revealed outright, but in how fragments could be leveraged. At the center were the children. Archie and Lilibet were not part of any media calculus, yet their welfare hovered over every decision. Advisors weighed intervention against restraint, knowing any move could be read as overreach or neglect. The margin for error was thin. Institutional survival dominated strategy. The monarchy's public line favoured accountability over rescue. To retreat risked credibility. To act aggressively risked accusations of cruelty. Patience and precision were paramount. As January turned to February, Harry remained largely unseen, but not inactive. Isolated yet moving, without allies or backing, Palace understood the risk. The most volatile phase is the quiet that follows a collapse, when decisions are made out of sight. Exile had entered its quietest, most dangerous phase, and that silence carried its own warning. So, what do you think really happens when a prince loses his home, his protection, and his family's trust all at once? Is this the end or the most dangerous beginning yet? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.